Hey everybody, today I'm going to show you how to splint your dog at home. This is Laika. She suffered an ulna fracture from a dog attack and we got x-rays of it. Everything is in line. It's a really clean break and so it's safe for us to splint her at home. I would recommend obviously seeing your vet before you do this to make sure that you're not going to splint an arm that needs to have other work done on it first. It is important to watch this video all the way through before attempting this because there are things that you can do to harm your dog by wrapping things too tightly. All right, here's all your materials that you're gonna need. Some medical scissors, cloth medical tape. You wanna get the least sticky medical tape that you can find because that's gonna go in their fur. An optional popsicle stick, I'll show you about that in a second. Splint padding or cast padding, and this is called stretch gauze. It's also called clean gauze. And vet wrap. Now the vet wrap and the splint or cast padding you're gonna have to probably order online. You can get those in bulk on eBay pretty cheap. If you don't have, for some reason can't get to a vet in the meantime to have them do this while you're waiting for your order to come in, there's also at the drugstore you can find something called, I think it's called tight grip, kind of splint wrap sort of thing. It's not as good as this. All right, now one of the most important things is keeping your dog immobilized as you're changing the splint. Laika's used to this, we've been doing it for a few weeks and she's mostly healed up now, so she's gonna be pretty cooperative, but if you need a second person to hold your dog down, this is how you hold them. Put your arm across their cheekbone, hold the leg underneath, you're gonna want the wounded arm on top, and then you can reach under the hind leg and immobilize the backside like that. And that's going to allow you to just keep her from being able to kick around while you're doing this. You ready?
Go.
All right, so we're cutting off the splint. I got the outer wrap cut off. And I'm going to cut through all of the padding and the gauze. So one thing you're going to want to do is when you have these stirrups on the paw, you don't want to be always ripping those off and putting them back on. So we're just going to cut across the top like that, and then when we do the next stirrup, we just put the tape on top of that piece so that we aren't agitating her fur too much. Now, a good trick to get your dog to kind of be distracted is just take that stinky dressing that you just took off of her leg. It smells like her gross BO. And you just kind of put it in there by her face. You can kind of sniff at that while you're working. Good girl. So first step is the stirrups. Just cut off about 8 inches of tape, depending on the size of your dog. And we're gonna put those down across the forepaw, the end hanging off like this. This is basically what's going to allow the splint to not get pried off as easily. One on the bottom, going opposite of the top one, and then if you want to, you can either stick this tape together to kind of keep it from getting dust and stuff all on it, or you can just lay a popsicle stick across there and then tape them together. That just helps keep that out of the way. And next we're going to use, I'm using cast padding just because I ordered this online and I didn't totally know what I was going to get. If you have a splint padding, it's actually a little stretchy. This stuff is not stretchy, it just tears easily. Either one will do the trick. You're going to start at the toes. And if you have splint padding, which is the really stretchy stuff, is what your vet probably uses, you're gonna wanna wrap this nice and firm. Now you don't wanna overdo any of the wrapping. You don't wanna wrap it too tight because you can cut off circulation. But with the underside, if you don't wrap it tight enough, it can rub and cause sort of bed sore things and they can get out of it easier. So with the splint padding, the stretchy stuff, you can stretch that usually up to about 50% of its stretch, and that's a good amount. This cast padding doesn't stretch. I don't want to like pry it as tight as I can. I'm just getting it nice and firm, overlapping about half of the material at a time, And then you want to avoid getting any wrinkles in this part, because when we put on the outer layer, the outer wrapping has a very high tensile strength and is very stretchy, and you don't want it to compress wrinkles down into the skin. That's another way that they can cause circulation problems. So make a nice smooth wrap job. You can add more wrapping on parts of the leg to make the sort of width of the entire thing uniform. And when we go up over the elbow, we're gonna give it wrap it a few times around that. You want to protect this part of the arm from chafing. So 3 wraps there, and kind of cover your tracks coming back down. There we go. You're gonna want to use 2 of these to get a good, nice layer of padding on there. And you can just pick up where you left off. You want to kind of go up, down, up, down. So you get 4 layers of this on there. Okay, after you have your splint padding or cast padding down, next up is the first clean gauze. You have 2. The second one's going to go outside the splint, and we're just going to do the same thing. So starting at the paw, and you can make this tight enough that it just really holds everything down firmly. Don't crank it as tight as you can. You don't want to make it like 100% of its stretch, and you also don't want it to kind of pull into these like, tight strips. Again, about 50% of its stretchability is probably the upper limit of what you want to do. One thing you can do to sort of gauge how tight you go is that you give it a stretch and kind of see how far it goes, and kind of do half of that or a little less. Okay, next we're going to take our spoon splint. Now she's, again, had this for a few weeks, so she's done a bit of damage to it. We've wrapped it with some padding at the top to help her out there. She kind of took out a chunk on the tip of it, so I wrapped that in some gauze too. You're going to take that spoon splint and you're going to fit it so that the toenails are about even with the bottom of the splint, and you want it to kind of form nicely to where it comes right up above her elbow. If you get this from the vet, they're gonna have a long one of these, and they cut it so that it's the right length. If you get your own, then you wanna cut it so it's gonna be a little bit above the elbow. You obviously don't want it to be rubbing in here a lot and poking her in the ribs too much. And so then we're gonna take, this is how our stirrups work, and take this tape, and just give it a twist, and then up the top side, and give it a twist, and up the bottom of the splint. If you want to at this point, you can put 2 or 3 pieces of tape around the arm to hold this on if you don't have a helper. If you do that, just make absolutely sure the tape is loose. It is just draped just enough to go flush across. You don't want to pull that tape tight because you will lose circulation. All right, so with that splint on, we're gonna take our second roll of stretch gauze or clean gauze. Clean, C-L-I-N-G, not clean. So if you have a helper, you can have them kind of hold your splint on. Like is kind of used to this part. She's given up already. I'm gonna start kind of down here towards the toes. All right, and now when you get up here to the elbow, make sure to kind of go over the top. We're holding this in line in the back of the arm the whole time, the splint. Go over the top. If you have enough, you can do that a couple times. Make sure this thing is on there. If your dog is anything like mine, they will try to tear this apart. So if you have a cone, that's good to keep on them, but just also making sure to cover everything and get it held together is just going to be your best bet there. Okay, so last step, is our vet wrap. Now, like I said earlier, vet wrap has a very high tensile strength and is really stretchy. It doesn't break, and so this is the stage where you could potentially do something wrong, cut off your dog's circulation. You don't want to do that. They could lose toes, but don't freak out about it too much. We were really nervous the first few times doing this, and we ended up going too loose, and that caused some chafing on her arm and also allowed her to more easily get her splint off when she tore at it. So I'll kind of show you the right tightness to go with these. Now, vet wrap, again, you're going to have to get on the internet. And you can order it in bulk for pretty cheap. For us here in Oakland, when we go to the vet to do all this, they charge about $38 for all the material expenses, which is about how much it costs when we go to the drugstore and just get the drugstore versions of all of this stuff to do it ourselves. So the internet is going to be your friend there. Oh, before I do this, here I want to show you something. So I left her toes uncovered, and the reason I did that is one of the ways you can tell if you've done this too tight is if you see any blanching in the toes, especially kind of in between the toes. You can look in there, look at the skin. You don't want to see any blanching. You can kind of tell if, and she'll probably also let you know by being very uncomfortable if she's losing circulation. Also, if sores start to develop around the pads and in between the toes, you can stuff cotton balls in between these toes before you wrap the outer layer. So again, vet wrap stretches about that much. You don't want to go more than probably 20% of its stretch, which is about that. And so basically, that's going to look like if we only go tight enough to get an even drape around the splint so that there's no like loose ends kind of sticking up and things like that, just that tight, and then maybe a tiny bit tighter is as tight as you want to go. So really, this is just holding everything on. You don't want it to be too tight. Better to err on the side of too loose when you're first starting out. That will cause far fewer problems. And again, you can kind of cover half of the material in each wrap. It's a good amount. And another thing you're going to want to try to do is just leave a little bit of this padding material here at the top, so that you're not having the vet wrap directly against the skin, because this is not comfortable. Now, the second layer, I'm just going to kind of start where I left off. This is how I do things. Some people say to always start from the toes. It's just whatever works for you. And again, we're going to want to make sure to get a nice, good, solid wrap around the top of that splint. You can kind of give it a stretch there and then let it collapse in on itself as you gently wrap it over. And just as loose as you possibly can, with it still being a good flush seal around that splint.